What does probate look like in Minnesota? You've probably heard a lot about probate, the process where your will gets enacted and your assets get distributed, but there's probably a couple things that you didn't know about the process, and these are the type of questions I'm getting all the day is what is probate really like? What does it look like inside a probate courtroom? Is it as painful as people say for your family? And what can actually be done to avoid it? Hey, my name's Matthew Tram, and I have done hundreds of Minnesota estate plans for Minnesotans that don't want to go through probate court. Today, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into this whole process and what people can do to protect their families. So a typical question I get is, what actually is probate? And easily said rather than done, a probate is a process whereby an asset that is stuck in a deceased person's name goes through a legal process to eventually be retitled into the name of another person who is the rightful beneficiary of that asset. And so this is quite a process, as you can imagine, and it is a process that is overseen by a court, and a specific court set up for this reason, a probate court. The next question I get is, why is a probate actually a bad thing? This is the plan that the government has for us when we pass away. It's the designated system for dealing with assets, like we just said, that are stuck in someone's name. Why is it so bad? Well, one of the things that will come up is the thought that going through probate would be like taking every single thing you own, assembling all of your family relationships, and taking all of that and bundling it up and taking it to the DMV and telling the Department of Motor Vehicles, where we get our license tabs in Minnesota, to settle this estate and make sure the right things go to the right people. It's just a long and drawn out governmental process. But some of the things that, right off the top, we just don't like about that is that probate takes a very extended period of time, almost by default. I had somebody in my office earlier today who said we had a very simple and good probate, and it still took us a year. That was on my client's father's estate, and he said, I do not want to leave that for my children. I want to make sure things are settled quickly. Another thing people don't like is the cost. Probate can be very expensive, and I've had attorneys who specialize in probate tell me that they think, as a general rule of thumb, that a client should understand that the costs of probate are going to be between 3 and 5% of the probate estate, as long as there's no conflict, or assuming there's no major conflict. So we don't like the process, the length, the cost. A lot of times we don't like the publicity, and this is one that has mixed reactions. Some people say, Matt, I have nothing to hide. Why would I care if my assets are publicized when I pass away? And, sometimes that may be the case, but a lot of times people do not want everything that they had, all of their family intricacies and perhaps intimate details being made public record. And I actually had one attorney tell me that it's almost like saying, I'm going to put all of the things I owned, all of my accounts, my real estate, etc., on a billboard alongside of the people who are now going to be getting those things. And so publicity would just mean, for most people, you'd rather not make your affairs public like that. Another thing, while we're on the topic, that people don't like about probate would be the idea that it can invite family members to have conflict, and certainly family members can have conflict when there's an estate plan in place, but a lot of times probate has a way of stirring the pot, and it does provide a forum that's going to be there for the disgruntled family members to have conflict with one another. And so this can lead to horrendous results for the family, and I'll share one of those in a minute, but people don't like the conflict element that's associated very commonly with probate. I think another thing people really should not like about probate, whether they understand this or not, is that probate is the process where if you don't have an estate plan, it's where the government decides where your assets should go. And there's statutes that talk about where someone's assets should go if they pass away, and there's all sorts of caveats depending on the family situation, etc. And maybe let's just say you have minor children, or you have a beneficiary that has special needs. Maybe the state's default that child gets the assets is not a good thing. And so a lot of times people don't like probate because maybe the right result did not happen because the state's default plan was applied. Those are the main things that I usually discuss with people about why they do not like probate. probate after having been through it. What is probate like in Minnesota? You know, it's better than some states, to be honest. You know, my mind naturally goes to the worst probates I've been a part of, and one of the ones that jumps out is where there was a will. Maybe for a separate video we can explain this, but a lot of people don't understand that a will, if we are relying on that will, still necessitates probate. But a will was going through probate and it had a clause in it that was slightly unclear, and it did relate to whether assets would be distributed to children or to the children and future generations should a child also pass away. And so needless to say, aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews sued each other over this language and racked up tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and all swore that they would never speak to each other again after this whole thing, all over the disposition of a single family home that was not worth a tremendous amount of money. And so that was a terrible one I was involved in. Another one I was involved in was a situation where there was a very, very old will, and again, a will itself goes through probate. This happened to be a will that was from the 1970s, and that probate is actually still going on. And of course, there were some complications in the situation and even in the will, but we ended up with a probate so far that's over 20 months long, and that's definitely not unheard of. And so probate in Minnesota can be very complex, very burdensome, and really put a tax on your family. And so again, it's another thing that people do not like, even in Minnesota, where maybe we're less burdensome than some other states. Another question that we get a lot is, Matt, after hearing all this, how can we avoid probate? And so back to that idea of what causes probate, it is the act of having an asset stuck in your own name when you pass away. The act of avoiding probate is to make sure that there is a set plan for that asset, that when you pass away, it is not stuck in your own name. And there's a couple different ways to go about this. I think the biggest comment I get on this is that in a lot of cases, it's much easier to avoid probate than people thought. So let's take the example of the house. If Ashley and I both own the home and I pass away, that's fine. She carries on as normal. She passes away. That is now fine because we have the name of our trust agreement, our estate plan, referenced on the deed that has been recorded with the county. Well, now the county knows what we want to happen with the house, and they do not need to defer to the probate court, which is going to be that 12-month process, in order to determine what should happen with the house. And so that is a very important thing here, is that we have now established a plan that we control that will establish a pathway for our home to transfer to our loved ones by our election rather than by the courts. And so that's the critical item here. Another question I would get is, why should you not put your family through probate? I think that's a little self-serving. I think at this point in the video, it's very clear that if we can avoid probate, we should. Even if you have a simple situation, sometimes I say that why would you put a very simple financial or family situation through a long and drawn out complicated process? And so for just about everybody, it makes sense to try to avoid the probate process. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you do live in Minnesota and you want to make sure you avoid probate with the very best estate plan possible, click the link below and watch our free video about how to protect your family and your assets with a solid estate plan in Minnesota. Thanks.